Hi Caroline, I'm Sarah from the upcoming. Lovely to meet you virtually.
Hi Sarah, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. So maybe we could just kick off for people who don't know anything about your film. How would you summarize a bit about what Delia Derbyshire, the Myths and Legendary Tapes is all about? Hard one to summarize, but how would
Yeah,
you capture it?
it is. Really, this has been a sort of a project that's been brewing for a long time, ever since I discovered that Delia's archive had been donated to Manchester University. So Delia Derbyshire, as you may know, she realised the Doctor Who theme tune, but along with that, she was a very groundbreaking avant-garde sound pioneer in electronic music. She really had a very unique approach, and so I've been fascinated by her for a long time. And a few years after she died, there was this discovery in her attic of 267 tapes, makeup tapes of her compositions. Lots of them we wouldn't have ever heard of because they would have been attached to TV programs, or there would have been some freelance work that we might probably wouldn't have had access to because it was, years and years ago, back in the 60s and stuff. So this is quite, it was quite a find. So going to Manchester University and listening to Delia, the sound of Delia, this person who'd fascinated me since a child, I was always, although I didn't know she'd realised the Doctor Who theme tune, I was always very affected by it and wondered why me and my friends all were. And it felt like there was some strange frequency that was telling us to hide behind the sofa. And I became sort of fascinated by that idea and wanted to hear more of what she did. So when I visited the Manchester Archive and listened to her sound, I just felt like here is this incredible unfiltered resource of beautiful sound that's evoking all kinds of ideas and imaginings about this woman and who she was. And I just really felt impelled to tell her story through my imagination. So this is not a biopic. This is not a sort of a linear idea of A to B of Delia's life at all. It's a very subjective sort of impression of mine from listening to her sound and collaborating with Cozy Fanny Tutti, who's also a really fascinating and brilliant musician in her own right. And I just had this sort of fantasy of bringing these two musicians together across eras and seeing how a collaboration could work between Cozy and I, me sort of interpreting it in a performative way and Cozy through sound. And that's really kind of the premise of the film, which sounds quite complicated, but actually I think we sort of navigated a way through it with a sort of a structure of sort of Delia's work, which is actually quite linear from start to sort of when she sort of started to work less with music and went into other areas of her life.
And it's completely non-conventional biopic, as you've kind of described. What kind of influences or inspiration did you take? Was it from watching other types of documentaries or films? Was it something that you were just purely inspired by the sounds? I mean, I think you described it as a poetic collage at some point, which is very much how we experience it, all these different soundscapes, but then we also get a view of her life, as time went on. So where did you get the idea to kind of put it together in this very particular way?
Well, really, to be honest, it was listening. It was listening to this music and this sort of library of sound that Delia had created. And as you know from the Doctor Who theme tune, you listen to that theme tune, and it was always disappointing to me how unterrifying apart from the Daleks, I was a bit scared of Daleks, but I was never as terrified as I wanted to be, having heard the theme tune. And actually, all of her sound, all of her music has this, evokes feelings and ideas, and she worked in a very collage way herself. So a lot of the ideas of the film are based on what I was hearing and trying to mimic her process of cutting together these she was using that technique of musique concrète, so she's manipulating sounds, she's creating sounds from scratch using electronic frequencies, and then these tapestries of beautiful kind of compositions would appear. And it was, I think she must have had to get herself in a very meditative state. And I wanted to somehow make a film that had that kind of collage feel and that poetry feel, which comes from her and her sound. But in terms of filmmakers, I think the idea of one space was a very important thing, because I wanted to feel as though we were in a studio, and I wanted to feel like we were in a sort of a cave of invention, which is something that was in my mind. And film studios always feel like that, recording studios feel like that. So I like the idea of a recording studio and a film studio, but I'm very quite a fan of the film Dogville, the Lars von Trier film. And I was always really inspired by that idea of how far you can push theatrical conventions and bring them into film, and they still feel like you're entering the world of film, and it's not like having a sort of a flat image of a theatre piece. It sort of takes you somewhere else, but also you've got this added layer of theatrical convention, which immediately sort of you key into allowing yourself to believe certain things that are clearly not real. I guess it's a very sort of Brechtian thing, but it's something I've really been fascinated by. Like, how far can you push those conventions and still tell a story, even though things are stripped down, and and you're aware that you're watching a construction. So that was just one of the thoughts. And also, in terms of using interviews, I really wanted interviews. I wanted to work, and I had to interview anyway, just for research, but it became so evident very early on that, we needed the backup of these real memories, and then I wanted to question the idea of memory. How people kept saying to me, this was a long time ago, Caroline, I don't remember everything. And so that idea of how reliable are our memories, how reliable, what happens between memory and imagination. And I just wanted to play with those thoughts within the context of Delia's sound world. And that's really where all the ideas came from. And I really like Bart Layton's films, and I really like the way he uses a sort of a fictionalization of the characters that you actually see on screen. So there was that too, was an inspiration.
And on the one hand, we're kind of immersed in the content she created, the music, the soundscapes, but we're also getting a glimpse of her as a person, the challenges she faced, particularly as a woman trying to get into that area of work, how she's snubbed, but she's also quite a rebel, in quite a lot of moments throughout the film. So was it something somehow important to you to kind of bring out that side of it? And knowing some of your other films, you've kind of focused on these unsung creatives in a way that have this rebellious nature. So is that something you have an affinity for? And is it quite interesting to go back and see how a woman working in that area might not have even realized what barriers she would have faced just to even, being allowed to work in a studio?
Yeah, I think I'm really interested in those characters that somehow you don't hear very much about. I mean, Delia we hear lots about now, but when I was growing up, I didn't know anything about her. It wasn't really until just before she died I was really aware of she was the person that was behind the sound. And likewise with the other films that I've done, they're kind of outsiders, and they're people that are brushing up against the mainstream, and they're not necessarily going to be acknowledged for what they do, yet they make huge waves and go on to influence culture. And I think that's a very important thing. I think, people, what happens to those stories? I'm really fascinated by what happens to those stories. And obviously, Delia is in a very long line of women whose stories are often kind of brushed under the carpet, and or it's some way diminished. And I think that's the feeling at the moment, and that it's really important. I think that at the moment now, diversity is starting to rise in all its forms, thank goodness, rise up the agenda, we're starting to hear these stories, and suddenly, as a result, it's cracking open all these other possibilities, because it's not, you know, those tropes aren't being played over in the same way, because when you're talking about different experience, then the stories will alter accordingly. And I'm really fascinated by that. I think it's a very exciting time to be able to do that. And within the film, we've got these stained glass windows. I really wanted to sort of memorialize some inspirational women, because I think you rarely see a stained glass window with a woman on it, unless she's the Virgin Mary, or, you know, somebody who's been a victim of religion in some way. You know, it's very that's maybe not the right thing to say about the Virgin Mary, but anyway, do you know what what I think is interesting, unless it's sort of a religious iconography, you rarely see women in statue form or stained glass window form, or, you know, they don't tend to leave those monuments behind them. And I really wanted the film just to be full of these stained glass images, which it hopefully is. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. I'm out of time, unfortunately, but thanks so much for sharing all that with me and for making this beautiful, transporting, quite trippy, but really amazing film.
Thank you for watching it. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
All right, thanks so much, Caroline. Cheers. Bye.